Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this session, which is entitled Service Charges and Best Practice Reviews. My name is Paul Jeps, by the way. I'm Head of Service Charge at Fortus. So this session is going to be, it's a collective group going to be talking on here, so you're not going to be just bored with my voice throughout, which you'll be pleased to know. But what we're going to be exploring a project that Fortus undertook with L&Q recently, where L&Q reached out to us to try and help out with some of their more problematic estates and their year-end service charge, shall we say. So we're going to go through the process we looked at and highlight everything we did and hopefully the impacts we had, and it would be very much a sort of case study interaction discussion from us all. So we'll start by just having a quick introduction from everybody who's going to be contributing to this session. So meet the team there. Then Adrian's going to talk through the brief, basically what he set out for us. Tom is then going to talk about how 2021 looked, so some examples of the financial statements that the residents would have received in 2021, and then the types of queries that maybe they received off the back of that. Lewis is also one of the managers here at the Fortus. He is going to talk about the approach we took and how it might differ to how work was done previously. I'll then go through some examples of the accounts that we prepared, so we can see how things were presented differently. Lewis will then pick up again on the types of issues that we identified, and to be fair, this will be probably everybody's going to contribute. So Lewis will raise the issues, and I'm sure Adrian and Tom will give their sort of reaction to those points. And then the impacts on L&Q will be covered off by Adrian and Tom, and then we'll cover off the conclusions of how the project went. And then there'll be some time at the end for any questions. So drop them in the chat and we can pick them up at the end. But if anyone's got any urgent points they want to raise throughout, then again, put it in the chat. We'll try and pick them up as we go along. So meet the team. So Adrian, do you want to?
Yeah, sorry, I'm first on that list, aren't I? So I suppose I should go first. Yeah, Adrian Shaw. I'm the head of rent and service charge for L&Q.
And I'm Tom Smith, rent and service charge performance manager, as it says there. So I work alongside Adrian at L&Q.
I'm Lewis, and I'm a service charge manager at Fortis, and I was the one leading it with Paul on this project.
And as previously introduced, I'm Paul Jeps, head of service charge at Fortus, and as Lewis sort of alluded to, he was the manager heading up the project from our side, but we had a number of other people working on the project, and as was the case at L&Q as well. There's a number of other people involved on, but we're the four presenting the findings of the project today. So.
Yeah, I mean, just adding to that, it's a bit like the iceberg. There's a swan busily paddling underneath. There are lots of people that sat behind this and produced a lot of work. So, thanks to the rest of our team that were running around getting all the information that Lewis was demanding of us, which we'll come on to a bit later. So, the reason that we went through this process was that, as with a number of housing associations, we produce our own accounts. So we produce our summary statement at the end of each financial year, and send those out, and then we get the resulting queries. I think it's fair to say that at L&Q, the element of trust from our residents has been relatively low, and I think it was an indicative part that when I joined last year, we ended up, I think it was well over 140 odd Section 22 requests, which was absolutely phenomenal. I'd been in a previous organisation, I thought getting 10 was bad enough. So that quantum of work that our teams are having to deal with on that outset sort of made us think, well, is there something we can do to give further reassurance? Now, clearly we didn't want to do this in a big bang, and we're rather glad we didn't do it in a big bang, which will come out in our discussions a bit later. But we looked at 3 large estates, and this is where we're providing services, but a lot of the owners on the estate purchase from a private developer, and we're in a limited liability partnership or other forms of partnerships with them, where we're actually acting as the managing agent. So we've got some very complex schemes with both outright owners, shared owners, and affordable tenants, and a lot of our tenants pay fixed service charge. So there was a mixture of fixed and variable. So I think we started out looking at 10, and we're very relieved we went down to 3. And the idea behind this was hopefully to improve customer service, reduce the customer queries that come in as a result of our accounts going out, having had them certified by an external firm, and hopefully by increasing customer trust and saying, look, you know, this is what L&Q have done to try and give you those assurances that, you know, we're not pulling the wool over your eyes, and here's an external validation. And hopefully was to try and reduce the time spent by L&Q teams, but we'll come on to that shortly. So obviously the current accounting period that we had last year, the leaseholds were issued with their year-end statement, as you would expect, with their share of the costs. Our leases don't require our service charges to be audited or certified by anyone other than the landlord. And we previously had a systems-based audit carried out by a well-known set of auditors who actually audit our statutory accounts for the company. But of course, that didn't specify to a specific estate what their circumstances were. It didn't test the invoices for those estates. It was very much process driven, and we were actually charging for this. And we came to the conclusion that really we couldn't charge for that audit because it wasn't relevant to a particular estate. It just gave a general view that our processes were sound, and there was a sample checking, but you know, your average person on an average estate wouldn't get any assurance from that the service charges on their estate were true and accurate. So that was the process we used to go through. We stopped that systems audit, much to the disgust of the auditor, who obviously therefore wasn't getting that additional money, and we decided to do this as a pilot. So over to you, Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. So we had a number of discussions over a year or so, probably before we started work, didn't we, about trying to understand the issues you were facing, and therefore it is our suggestion that perhaps if we come in and basically follow TECO 311 best practice guidelines and produce full sets of accounts for each of the estates, whereby we'll perform our audit work and our tests on those estate and block level rather than at the higher systems level that was being done in the past, and then issue a report that is relevant to that particular set of accounts, as opposed to again a global report which we were having in the past. So that was really our approach what we were going to take, and then off the back of concluding, which was I think 98 sets of accounts in total across the 3 estates, we covered off a management letter highlighting our areas that we identified that you should consider going forward. So I think that sort of sets up the tone for what the work we was about to undertake. So we will now have a look at what 2021 position was. We'll start there and then move into what we did thereafter. So over to you, Tom.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. So this is a redacted example of what we might have sent to somebody at the end of our 20 to 21 financial year. So all our financial years run April to March, and this is an example of a statement we would have sent following March 21. It is very basic. It does what it needs to do. It's very small, but you can probably make out the gist of it there. At the top line on the second page is an amount that they paid on account as an estimate, just over £2,000. And then there's a breakdown at the various levels that we charge at of total cost and the cost to them. It doesn't show previous year's costs or give it any other context other than this is how much we spent, this is how much is due to you for each service. We charge it, we've got a hierarchy in our particular system that charges at 3 levels or up to 3 levels depending on the complexity of the estate. So we have estate level, scheme level, block level. That's why you see 3 different sections there. But essentially the bottom line is the total there, which you can see just around £1,900, the total of all those individual service lines. And then we ended it with a variance between what we charged as estimate and the actual cost. So there was a little credit back to them at the end of the year, which was good for them. We round off the statement with a statement of the sinking fund. That's the cumulative balance up to the end of the financial year, all the contributions that have been made over several years, deducting any expenditure that we might have incurred during that period. So we've done what we, according to the lease, need to do. It's compliant with all the legislation. We've told them what we estimated, we've told them what the actual cost was, we've told them what the balance was. But there's no kind of reassurance to that other than this is the landlord certificate. There's nothing there to say that the costs have been verified externally. So this is where we have fallen short in the past, and people have kind of challenged and questioned and really asked for that extra bit of reassurance. So it's just important to say at this point that we're still issuing these statements. We still have to issue the landlord certificate, which will look something similar to this for 21-22 and beyond if we go further with this. But the addition of the Fortus account should give that reassurance that customers are seeking. The next slide is just a kind of summary of perhaps audit related queries that we've had from leaseholders in the past. So typical question will be around apportionment. How do you work out what I pay for as a leaseholder? What is my property share of the block cost, the estate costs? Is it done by percentage? Is it done by equal share apportionment? The statements that we send don't provide much or any detail on that other than sort of kind of working it out with a calculator. Another typical question, why do I pay more than my neighbour pays? And again, it relates back to apportionment. There may be good reason. It may be to do with tenure, because their neighbour might be a tenant, not a leaseholder, so they don't pay for certain items. They may live in a 1-bedroom flat rather than a 2-bedroom and pay less as a result. But all of these queries come back at us year on year. The next query, I don't receive a particular service. Why do I have to pay for it? And it will be down to the terms of their lease. It might be they're paying for a lift, but they live on the ground floor of a block, but it's still a facility for the building. They still have to pay for it, and the lease will state that. But without that kind of overall assurance and check from third party, it might not be as apparent to them as it should be. And then we will have questions raised, or we've had questions raised about who actually checks the accounts. You know, do we get an audit done? And we get requests for certified accounts for an estate, which in the past we haven't been able to provide because the overarching audit we did just dealt with general terms, not with specific accounts for a particular estate. And as Adrian mentioned earlier, we have had increasing number of Section 22 requests year on year up to 2021. We haven't got there yet with 21-22. They're still coming in. There might have been other extenuating reasons for it, like the pandemic, for example, and people with more time on their hands a couple of years ago. But we've definitely seen an increase to quite an unmanageable extent. So we're hoping that this exercise on 3 key estates, 3 complicated estates, will hopefully reduce those numbers of requests. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, sorry, My screen's frozen. I apologise. Let me.
Well, I believe it's me next anyway.
Oh, there you go.
Trying to sort it out. To the Fortus approach. So as all new jobs start, we had a bit of a debrief from Tom and Adrian themselves on what the three estates entail, what are their nuances, and then a bit of a background on what the data we would be being provided. And as Adrian alluded to earlier, there would have been a lot of big data coming our way. So as a result, to manage our requests for this big data, we used our workflow management software Foresight. So rather than it being pinged back and forth between emails, we would have all the data in one place and we all know what we were talking about. So first off, me and Tom had a call on what the working plan was. He told me the workflow of what data we would be able to receive straight away and what we'd have to wait on. So the data we received straight away would have been a nominal breakdown of cost, a smaller version of what the internal recharges cost that L&Q help provide services for would come a bit later. So we started working on the nominal activity of the external cost. I had a team that would go through it. We'd put it into each block, estate and scheme level on our internal working papers. We started to pull together the necessary workings before we could start testing. Once Tom was then able to provide the L&Q internal costs, we were able to get a final rough draft of what accounts did look like and what we needed to then start testing. One of the issues we did face early on was we weren't able to pull out a reliable budget. So we would have been putting that in the accounts, but we did use that to jumpstart a few questions between me and Tom, just to make sure some costs look marginally right, some look vastly wrong. What's the difference? Is it the budget that's wrong or what's else? So as you can know, with any new clients, there's quite a few back and forth calls between me and Tom and my team and Tom's team, just to make sure we are looking at the right data. Once we had a sort of final approach on what the final data would look like, we then started testing. So testing not only looked at the individual invoices, but the matrices behind the invoices. So certain invoices would cover not just this block, but a lot of other blocks or bigger schemes that just weren't included. We then asked Tom, can we see the invoice? He would send us the invoice, and the invoice is 10 times larger than what's here. So we were then, can we see the matrix? This matrix was then tested and verified to be 99 out of 100 times correct on the cost being in the accounts is the correct apportionment. As Tom knows, another one that is a bit tricky is the insurance, as that's managed centrally across all their blocks. So once that came through, we then looked at the matrix for that. So there was a lot of going into the granular detail, which Tom and Adrian wouldn't have had the time to go in and verify every block they do. Just on that larger scale, bringing us in was able to drill down, make sure the right costs are in the accounts and they are being applied at the right rates. So once we had the final numbers and the final testing, we then put them into our account formats, which again aligns with TECO 311. And this just shows what the breakdowns of the cost are. Unlike last year, we were showing a comparative. So then the blocks could now see what they were charged this year and what they were charged last year. Due to issues with the budget, that would have been put in, but we couldn't get a last minute correct version. And then to support our numbers, we then put our notes, which would then talk about the fixed service charge income, the variable service charge income, what L&Q's contribution were, has there been any accruals for certain cost codes, was there a provision for things like electrical testing. And then as a result from pulling all this together, we were then able to, as Paul alluded to, pull together a management letter of what had gone smoothly and what had not gone as quite so smoothly, which was why it was good for Adrian to pilot this rather than do it all at once, because Adrian probably would have just gone crazy the amount of data we were requesting, the amount of calls we were having just on these 3 estates. And then once we had pulled all the final figures together, Paul would then review each set of accounts. So it wasn't just me and my team looking over it. Paul would go through it and then we would issue them to Tom for any final queries, any costs Tom didn't think was correct, and then we would iron them out and come to the correct position.
Thanks very much, Lewis, for that overview of the work done. Now, then, just to look at what the outputs were that we produced. So obviously, a few months ago, we looked at what was presented in 2021, which is effectively a statement of account for each tenant. And as Tom said, that will continue. That doesn't change because that gives the individual unit charge. But what the leaseholders are going to get this year is a full set of accounts, which follows the same formats that we use for across all of all the sort of 3,000 properties we act for in private and housing association sectors. So we have a cover and an information page. It looks and feels like any set of accounts that you would expect to receive. There's on page 2 there's a landlord's report, which is effectively Adrian has signed off that he's happy and he's approved the numbers. And then we go on to our report, which is probably a little bit small here, but it's basically a report of factual findings, which is the prescribed approach under TECO 311, where we look at 3 key areas. Firstly, we say, right, do the numbers in this set of accounts actually conform to the systems? Have they come off of the data straight from the client? So we have to verify that. And then there's the second item is obviously based on samples. We check that actually the figures within we have verified them back to relevant documents, as invoices or various other information that we might have required in order to support those the numbers are in the accounts. And therefore, if we're all happy with that, we sign off, and as was the case here. So these are the preliminary pages of the accounts, and then we move over to sort of the detailed elements, which again you can see we've got an income and expenditure account shown, and this is actually exactly the same. This is the same property as the example shown for 2021. So again, we've got the estate, sorry, the block, and then the scheme, and then the estate, the 3 different components. But as Lewis said, we include the prior year actuals on here to give everybody a comparative as to where costs have gone. And obviously, electricity is a standout, that we know that's gone up across for everybody. But what's slightly different here is we show the collective cost. These are the total costs that have been incurred for the whole estate and the block and the scheme, etc. So that actually the thinking behind here is when you've got mixed tenure buildings, that a leaseholder will only receive his statement which shows their share of the costs. What we wanted to demonstrate is that this is the fuller costs, and as a result there are fixed service charge income that is contributed effectively from L&Q. So that comes in as well, and therefore hopefully the leaseholders will recognise that they are not paying the entire costs, and there are contributions from other rented and non-leasehold properties. So that's what these pages show, and then after the income and expenditure, we also presented a page of notes which are relevant to the account. So just quickly go through the notes. We've got accounting policies, so it's important to show what the accounting policies are, and in this instance they're on a cash accounting basis, but again it's something we'll explore a little bit further as we go through this session. We then talk about the surplus. So this particular accounts are showing for the year an overall surplus of just over £5,000 there, and we talk about how that will be distributed back and how it's been collected. So that's in note 2. Note 3 there, I don't know if you can see on your screen, my screen's covered up by Adrian's face at the moment, but there's a bit more detail about the reserve fund. So this particular property actually collects reserves and sinking funds going forwards, and so we've looked at the sinking funds collections again and verified those to the scheme, and therefore we're able to give that information within the accounts. Also, there's also reference to the bank. Again, this is more so a requirement in the private sector, but we thought it adds no, it's good information to basically confirm that the funds are being held where they're held, and that they're ring-fenced service charge funds. We have a connected parties note. Again, this is sort of standard disclosures, just basically explaining where costs are. There's additional income generated to L&Q. A building insurance note, again, that's on there explaining what the policy details are and the cover period. And it also goes into the fact that it talks briefly about how it's apportioned across all of the L&Q stock effectively. And then we have a note about a provision for some costs in there, which are possibly just outside of the cash accounting, which again is something we'll come on to a bit later. So that's an overview of the accounts. That all 98 sets looked very similar. Some of them had less notes. Some of them perhaps didn't have sinking funds, for instance, so you wouldn't have that note. Some of them may have only had a one schedule, or some of them might have had two. But this is probably throws a good flavour for across many of the blocks that we looked at. So now we talk about some of the issues we identified.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, when working on any job, you'll find inconsistencies and inefficiencies, whether it's a new client or a client that's been going for many, many years. As part of this review of their internal systems, me and Tom identified quite a few issues that we just wanted to talk through at the moment. So one common issue that's not just on the housing association, this is across most of our sector, is internal systems not aligning. So there's reports that people handle off of the software, and then whether that agrees to the one that's on the software, which one's most up to date. So as Tom will explain in a minute, this is quite common, but we notice, like, let's take reserve funds, for instance, Tom. We knew there was one master folder of what the reserves fund should be, and whether that was reflected in the system wasn't always tying up. So over to you, Tom, regarding internal.
Yeah, that's thanks, Lewis. Yeah, that's correct. There's certain systems set up for different purposes within L&Q. The sinking fund reserve fund balances was one where we were finding inconsistencies, and it's actually a battle we have with our finance team every year to make sure these figures add up. So it's not surprising there was some anomalies that came up. I think for us, our systems are set up to produce the statements that we demonstrated earlier, the 2021 type of statement. So they're set up to look at individual unit level statements. We don't really have reports that deal very well with the global level, looking at a whole estate, and particularly where we've got mix of tenure, which I think all three of our estates do. We have tenants and leaseholders on those estates. Tenants generally paying fixed service charges. To try to quantify the fixed income and how that impacts the estate as a whole is quite difficult to do, and I think that's where we probably fell down the most, actually, I'd say, Lewis, isn't it? Where we tried to tie these two things together using reports that weren't really designed to cater for what Fortus were doing for us.
Yeah, and
yeah.
I was going to say, this one leads neatly onto the next one of data inconsistency. When we first started, Adrian alluded to that a lot of tenants didn't know what L&Q were contributing to. They just believed what they were given at the end was the full cost, and they were paying that. So taking a step back from that, we looked at what was the total cost and what did L&Q contribute to them. And this caused a bit of an issue identifying what actually L&Q contributed versus what they think they contributed. And overall, we found out L&Q were contributing more, which was good for both the tenants and you to recognise that was one key issue. But it also then drove up the issues of finding the right sets of data. And as me and Tom know, we probably sent 15 to 20 drafts of sets of data, just trying to get to the final point of, this is the final cost, this is what L&Q contributed, this is what fixed tenants paid, and this is what variable tenants pay. So yeah, just over to you, Tom, on how your system works. And
yeah, well, again, it's we set estimated charges for everybody at the start of the year, fixed and variable, but of course we only provide year-end statements for variable payers. And again, it comes back to the reporting that we have currently. It doesn't really give a reconciliation on the fixed side. So we know what we've charged to our tenants, but we don't really, although we know notionally we should have charged in the actuals, we don't produce a report that shows that. Compounded with the fact that fixed payers don't pay for every service anyway, because their rental income will cover things like buildings insurance, building repairs and that kind of thing. So there's a kind of doubling up of missing costs almost, and we're trying to quantify those was probably one of the big challenges.
Yeah, I agree. But as we've gone through the method of this work, we have found ways to quantify what was the right cost. And as I said, our testing was based on that, and we were able to verify those costs. So it wasn't a case of we couldn't get there in the end. We did get there in the end and managed to solve it. This leads next on to the reporting constraints. So one of the issues we faced is they run a live system, so we couldn't pull an accurate budget. When we do most of our testing and variance analysis, we do look actuals to budgets to prior years. So we were able to take certain budgets, so whether they had PDF versions at the start or what they have now, even though it wasn't 100%, we could use that for our testing, but we still tested against a prior period. Tom's fully aware that working on a live system has a lot of benefits, but when you want to go back and have a snapshot of what it was like back then, it can be hard to recreate that data.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, 2 out of the 3 estates we selected for this exercise are actually phased handovers, which means that the way the stock looked in April 2021 at the end of March 22, because we'd added further phases to them. So trying to track back and work out what the budget would have been for the estate as it was.
Certain electricity ones, we know your building insurance team was taking their time to get us the breakdowns of that, which then did delay us finalizing our testing. So yeah, one thing I said about Tom is implementing a documentation management system, maybe just a place where it is readily available for everyone to pull on from.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Lewis. It's a problem we are well aware of at L&Q. We have documents stored. We do pretty well with our invoice storage, but they're stored in different places around different systems, not in one central location. And where we have a single invoice with buildings insurance, there's one invoice paid per year, one premium paid to the insurer. That's fine. We can provide that document, but trying to split it down so you can evidence what each leaseholder's premium is individually from that total premium is quite difficult without support from the insurance team in this case to give us that information.
Yeah, and like I said on that one, you were able to pull the information. It was there, it just needed gathering up and given to us, which was good. Moving on to the next point, inconsistent accounting policies. So even though this was on a cash accounting basis, we noticed a few provisions being put in which we wouldn't normally see. So one being accounting costs, another one being electrical testing. So they would split it out over a 5-year period, but only test the electrics 1 or 2 years. So just raising this as a point on trying to stay consistent. If you're going to do it, we recommend full-heartedly going one way or the other.
Yeah, sure. And it's again decision we've made, but we probably need to look at for future, where we've tried to smooth out the service charge effectively. So if electrical testing, water testing, that type of thing is periodic beyond a 12-month cycle, so you're not always going to get a cost in that year, we tried to smooth the cost out so that everyone is paying a flat rate across a 3 to 5 year period, let's say. but it is in conflict with what our leases say, which is expenditure incurred in the 12-month period. So if we're following it to the letter of the lease, then we should be seeing zero cost. Maybe year 4 we then get a high cost for one of those services, and then we're back to zeros again. But we've done it with the best of intention, but it probably does cause this conflict, which is then gives a problem to an external accountant who's trying to decipher it all.
Yeah.
I'll just add to that. So I think this is a debate that Paul and I have been having about cash and accrual accounting, and TECO 311 is accrual accounting. I'm still struggling with the fact that we obviously are governed by Section 20B of the Landlord and Tenant Act, which is costs incurred, and we've had determinations in tribunals around that. So I think it'd be interesting to get a viewpoint from others on it, because it's certainly something I still struggle with. I don't think it's actually really been tested in a tribunal as to when you're doing accrual accounting, particularly for, say, managing agents, to say, well, 9 months of this is relating to the new financial year and only 3 months to the existing financial year. What happens in 18 months time when you're then doing your cash accounting for the current year, but your invoice is dated 1st of January last year? So those are the discussions and the debates I think we have to have, and we recognise that on account payments, obviously Section 20B doesn't come into play until you go into deficit, but when does the deficit occur? And those are all those healthy debates and discussions we've had, and I think that obviously made people scratch their heads. And things around electrical testing, as Tom said, it was done in the best intentions, partly because we were trying to do a catch-up of electrical testing across the organisation, and we needed to do it quite quickly, but we put in a 5-year spread so that people didn't get those peaks and troughs. But really and truly it should be a peak and a trough, things like electrical testing or FRAs.
No, thank you for Adrian. And like I said, we understood the rationale behind it. It wasn't a case of this is done randomly. There was only a few areas which, when me and Tom had our preliminary discussion, this was picked up then, and we just carried on the discussion throughout the work. The next point is inconsistent apportionment of cost. So some costs we would expect to have been apportioned equally between certain things, and me and Tom just had to sit down and discuss, why is it not? Or yes, it should be. The one going back to the reserve funds, there were certain things that weren't equally shown between the contributions of different blocks. So this just was a case of taking a step back, looking at the matrices involved with how the costs are set up and why they were set up that way, and do they need to be revisited?
Yeah, absolutely. Just picking up on that, the estates we selected are all fairly complex in their setup, and apportionment rules can differ across them. We've got our own service charge module at L&Q, which works brilliantly, but it does rely on the correct data and rules being applied to it. And we picked up a few anomalies, I think it's fair to say, Lewis, isn't it, in the way we'd used it. But on the other hand, there were times when the rules that we had in place were completely legitimate and reflective of what the apportionment should have been. So, it's not always done by equal share apportionment in the schemes we're dealing with. They tend to be done now on relative floor area, for example, when we talk about block costs, rather than the traditional equal share apportionment. So our module captured that and has presented that as accurately as we can, but due to the complex nature and many pages of different services and different rules, there were one or two that slipped through the net and were incorrect.
And then leading on finally to the recovery of cost. So as Tom said at the start, the system they use at the moment picks up the variable cost for the variable payer, but when you're trying to report on a full basis of everything that was incurred and wasn't incurred, we came up with the issues of what is L&Q's contribution, what happens to the surplus deficit, is that recovered wholly on the variable payers, or does L&Q get their small percentage if they're contributing to the cost? So we just had a long discussion on what costs L&Q do pay off, where's the evidence, how's that pushed forward, where's the matrices involved with that, and then finally, is there any other cost that you didn't think you were paying for, but when we looked into the details, we found out these were being covered by L&Q. Yeah, so over to you, Tom, to just talk.
As Lewis says, it's around L&Q's contribution towards the rented tenures, but also the fact that certain costs, certain services were capped for the leaseholders due to things like lack of Section 20 consultation at the start of the contract. So there was quite a lot there, I think, that we weren't charging in full that we otherwise would have done to leaseholders. So that kind of added to the pot of unrecoverable costs that L&Q are effectively absorbing and not passing on. Thanks.
Okay, guys, thank you very much for that overview of some of the issues that we worked our way through during the course of the work. So really now over to Adrian and Tom to sort of give us the impacts the project and the work that we had on you. Obviously, we know it was something new to you, and probably we attacked the three of your larger, more complex properties. Yeah, over to you guys, right?
Yeah, thanks for that, Paul. I think, I mean, just to be totally transparent with everyone, we have to say that we haven't yet fully issued these accounts. We're still mopping up. We did issue to one estate. Unfortunately, there was a very eagle-eyed auditor there who noticed the glitch, and it was around the income area. So we were telling him in one set of accounts you're in deficit, and another you're in credit, and that was due to this treatment of income. So I'm eating humble pie at the moment with that gentleman, and he's saying, why did I sign these accounts off? But you know, it is a pilot. We recognize there are a few issues, so we are almost there. But clearly what we wanted to do, the benefit we felt, was the external validation, which, as you know, Lewis has gone through, and you know, I think we probably should send this recording to all of our residents to show them actually how much time and effort was spent by both Lewis and Tom in getting to this level of assurance. We hope that there will be reduced inquiries. Obviously, that's got to be assessed. As Tom said earlier, we have issued our own accounts. We were hoping to issue them in conjunction with the Fortus ones. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to do that, but we'll wait and see whether that does help us. Similarly, a reduction in Section 22 requests. We are seeing less this year. I think, as Tom said, quite a few people are going back to work now, so haven't got as much time on their hands. But you know, whether that is through other systems, but we would hope that would help. And it really is giving that reassurance to customers that there has been this robust engagement with, you know, a reputable firm of accountants who are specialists in this area, and they've done this due diligence. And they are professionally produced, as Paul showed that example, which, you know, and each leaseholder will see the level. And we were debating this because on the large schemes, we've got, like, you know, all these blocks. Well, do we tell people in each block what the other block has been charged? And you know, and basically the answer is, well, yes, we should. I mean, yes, there might be queries of why they're paying less than me, or why they're paying more than me, or why am I paying more than them? But you know, that does give that level of transparency across the scheme, which can be quite complex. So you'll have both estate, scheme, and block costs, and we're dealing with some leases where they actually have scheme level as well as estate level. Now, most of us would probably treat that all as one, but in those leases, they carve up the estate into sort of, well, phases, I think they call it, which causes an extra level of complexity to us. And I mean, also that point, it's a justification of actually charging this audit fee, because we were charging £10, which didn't mean anything. So not everyone's going to be paying an audit fee this year. It's only those estates that have had this service charge certification done. I think the drawbacks we probably you worked out from the discussions between Tom and Lewis. It was a hugely timing exercise. Had we been reliant on the 30th of September, then we would have been serving Section 20B notices. Clearly, we haven't, because we've served our own accounts. And I think, you know, it was a pilot. As Lewis indicated, we're new clients. You know, understanding the way we all work takes a bit of time, and poor Lewis bore the brunt of that, I have to say. And it's that extent of the information gathering. I think there was one electricity invoice that Lewis was drumming his fingers over, saying, "Where's this invoice?" And we were equally going to our energy team, "Where's this invoice? You know, this is holding up the whole process." And the mixed tenure, we've talked about that the whole way through. The difference of accounting, the difference of how we treat income, what contributions comes from L&Q, what contributions comes from fixed service charge payers, and what contributions come from leaseholders. And as I say, the variable and fixed service charge payers, you know, that Section 11 issue of what's non-recoverable, what is recoverable. And, you know, again, confusion regarding the accounting of our contributions to the rented properties as fixed service charge income, were those drawbacks, which, you know, we've learned from this, and it's been a really useful exercise. And I think we just need to conclude now, Paul, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're almost there with all of the accounts. I think the final ones were sent over earlier this week, so that's great. And I think, like you said, it is a pilot. It was a big exercise. There's an awful lot of data and information to understand, and I think it's been, you know, a bit of a learning curve probably on both sides. But I think, you know, hopefully, if we sort of approach this again for L&Q or anyone else, we'll have it will be a far more smoother process. I think the issues with, unfortunately, when you test on sample basis, the whole sort of ethos behind the sample is you have to get that whole sample validated, and if something is missing, the alternative is to open it up to every item within all the transactions. So that's why we've probably been a bit of a stickler over that one electric invoice, which did hold up that, you know, that particular set of accounts. But anyway, we got there in the end. But yeah, it was just a few issues. But I think it's been, you know, it's been we've enjoyed the challenge. I hope you've had some enjoyment, as well as just a bit of additional time, shall we say. But and I hope, you know, fingers crossed, that all the customers and the leaseholders actually can see the benefit and actually appreciate it, and it serves the purpose that it was actually set out to do. But so to conclude this session, then, just a few statements really from Adrian and myself, which we probably covered off in words anyway. But
yeah, I think we have, Paul. I think, you know, what I've said there, I've covered off earlier on. It's certainly been a worthwhile exercise. You know, there's no gain without pain, as they say. But you know, we will hopefully see the fruits of our labour, and hopefully it'll be appreciated by the resident.
Absolutely, and the same from our point. And I guess it's just worth, we did only look at 3 of the more larger complex estates, which will not more than likely have more of the issues that we found in it. But there'll be lots of these items that we raise in the management letter to you will be relevant to your whole wide stock. So hopefully you can take on that on board and therefore implement some of the suggestions or take a body, which, you know, we know that L&Q, you're looking at into new systems. So again, this will provide a little bit more support for you guys getting the accounting element right in when they choose the right system to implement at L&Q. Yeah. So that's pretty much wraps up our session, what the areas we wanted to talk about today, but it does leave a few minutes left. I think we've got about 10 minutes left, according to my clock, for any questions. If there are there's
nothing in the chat, as I can see. If you wanted to stop sharing, Paul, we might be able to see people if anybody wants to ask a question.
I put to Paul, our leases, I'm relatively new to this, so I do apologise. Our leases state 6 monthly, that we send invoices 6 monthly. Would you recommend changing these to 12, varying the leases throughout?
So
yeah, I mean, sorry, Michelle. I'm sorry, Paul. I mean, Michelle. So your leases are saying what? That you send
invoices 6 monthly.
I've never seen a lease that says that, so that's an interesting one.
Well, they relate back to the old council days to our leases. We've inherited them.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I'd be more than happy to have a look at that lease with you, Michelle, offline, and have a discussion about it, because certainly you want to be able to do something that's relatively easy, and of what benefit is it to those residents? Is that dialogue with the residents to say, well, do you actually want this? And is there a way? Trouble is trying to vary leases is always going to be fraught with difficulties, I guess. But it'd be really interesting to see that lease and see what it says, because I certainly haven't come across that. I mean, obviously there's usual of people paying on estimate or people paying on actual, but
yeah, that's what I was going to suggest there, Adrian. I mean, likewise, happy to have a look at the lease for you, Michelle. But yeah, I did wonder when I saw it pop up in the chat earlier whether it's actually referring to a 6 monthly on account collections rather than 6 monthly actuals. But yeah, happy to have a look and see if we can help.
Yeah, I mean, my sort of thinking with this type of thing is that if it's to the benefit of all parties to bill in a different way, then it doesn't necessarily need a formal variation, as long as there's a kind of agreement between everyone that you're going to change to something else. But I guess it's future-proofing it as well, isn't it? So a future landlord or a future leaseholder under the same lease is compliant with whatever you've agreed from this point forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it'd be costly as well, I'm guessing, if we vary.
Well, it's getting everyone to agree, and that's the problem. You might have just one person holding out that's refusing to have the assignment done. Sorry, the variation done.
Thank you. I've just got one more, sorry, just a really quick one. Our estate service team carry out the grass cutting and communal cleaning. It's never gone out to tender. Are we on a bit of a sticky wicket because it's an in-house team?
No, you're not really. I mean, providing you can demonstrate value for money. I mean, it's not a qualifying long-term agreement because it's an in-house team that does it. We have in-house teams at L&Q that provide the estate services. And I think you may or may not wish to market test it. That's down to you. But ultimately, at the end of the day, if you can demonstrate its value for money, there's no VAT issue, which is one good thing. So obviously reduces the cost. We don't tend to get challenges over the cost. We get more challenges over the service delivery than the actual physical costs. But it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. I mean, we have some services that are externalized, others that remain internal.
Perfect, thank you.
Could I ask a question, please? It relates to sort of on-site scheme staff, where we have sort of internal staff delivering estate services and things. And what sort of the regulation around what can be to recharge the leasehold? There's been quite a lot of debate internally about what elements of the salary costs can be recharged to the leaseholder. Traditionally, we've just recharged basic pay, so we've stripped out all pension contributions and on costs. But obviously it's leaving Guinness with quite a big sort of deficit on some of them services. I'm just wondering what sort of the mandate, I suppose, around charging it, so we can get some sort of uniform agreement in place.
Well, I mean, sorry, go on, Paul.
So just talking from our experience, then obviously the first thing to always refer back to is the lease. What cost can we recover? And if it is concierge or staff costs on site for cleaning, etc., it's the cost to deliver the service. So therefore, that cost, in my eyes, would include employers' contribution for national insurance and pension and all of these other things. That is a cost of employment if that individual is providing their service for the service charge, basically. So that is what we normally see, to be quite honest with you.
No, and I mean, supporting what Paul said, Darren, I mean, it's everything, because if you're an external contractor, you're not going to say, oh, I'm not going to pass on the national insurance costs. We charge, so for estate services, caretaking, we'll charge for the supervisors as well. So the element of the supervisor's role is chargeable back as part of that service, because they're monitoring the service, they're organising the delivery of that service. I mean, there was a question that came up the other day. Somebody spotted on the managing agent's set of accounts that they were charging for tea and coffee in the office. Well, it was fairly de minimis, and you know, I think it was a bit extreme, but I would certainly be charging the full cost, the pension costs, the national insurance costs, overtime. You know, it's all still delivering those services, and providing you can quantify where the service is delivered and how much time spent, then that's fine.
Yeah, no, that's fine, thank you. Just we've got a lengthy sort of query coming in from a leaseholder who feels like he's paying a contribution towards the house manager's rent, and we've hidden his rent within the leasehold accounts and things, which we haven't, but it's trying to evidence that. And we've actually only charged basic pay as well. We haven't actually charged all the on costs, so they are getting it at a much reduced rate than the true cost to us.
Well, I suggest that query should, you know, suggest you look into it and actually charge him a full cost, and he's going to get a little bit more next year. Maybe.
Cheers.
Right. Well, I'm conscious now we're almost at the end of time, but you know, I'd like to thank everyone for attending our session. I hope you found it useful. You know, it's very much nice to see a live example. When Paul suggested this, I was a bit nervous, but I think it's a valuable thing to do. You know, warts and all. I'm sure others on this call have seen and understood and think, oh yeah, that sounds familiar to us. And you know, we all have those issues that we need to try and resolve, and it's been a very useful exercise, and we hope that you've benefited from it. If you're coming to the conference tomorrow, Paul, Lewis, Tom and I will be there, so you can grill us further if you want. And Michelle, if you're coming, you can bring your lease along. And just like to thank everyone again for coming along, and enjoy the rest of your day. And if you're coming tomorrow, hopefully enjoy the conference face to face. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.